So let's talk hyperlapse today for the Blackhawk 2 Pro and the EXO Mini Pro. Does it work? Well, remember, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Hey guys, thanks for stopping by. Always appreciate it. It's good to see you. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Keith and this is Alien Drones. I do mostly tech, drones, photography, tips and tutorials, and industry news. And if that's something that's of interest, you may want to click that subscribe. That way you'll be notified when some cool stuff pops up that might be up your alley. So today we're going to talk exclusively about hyperlapse. And we're going to do some hyperlapse specifically, as I mentioned, on the Blackhawk 2 Pro and on the EXO Mini Pro. Without further ado, let's just jump right into the flights I just took. Now with hyperlapse, I'd always recommend that you do it with a really full battery because it can take a long time. When you set this up, it takes a lot of pictures so that it can do the hyperlapse depending on your settings. So you want to make sure you have a full battery so that you don't end up halfway through your shots of 200 pictures and then it doesn't work for you. Okay, and you can see here that the image stabilization is turned on, so we're going to go ahead and do that. I wish there was more in this mode. I wish there was another mode, a line, so I could just go at a constant speed in one direction without having to try to hold the stick. The circle is nice, but I don't want to do a full circle. I just kind of want to do an arc or something. So let's go ahead and see if you can do something like that with just changing the parameters a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put it here. We'll do a circle. One thing that I did notice is that this little window has more parameters, and I had no idea that it was down there until I started swiping up. So some of the problems I had may have been that they were buried in those parameters. So I'm going to make sure we hit all those here. They should have put those up on the screen a little more. I kind of botched it the first time here. So let's see what we can do here. So, and then we're going to do a clockwise, which is just fine. So we're going to move this over here a little bit, get us lined up. So we want to do a little bit less here. We're going to do about 8 seconds of time. That should give us some idea. And we're going to take our flight speed down as low as we can, and we're going to do a little bit less. We're going to do a little larger radius, so it kind of almost flies on a sideways path instead of so much of an arc. So let's do that. There we go. Let's see what those parameters look like here. See if it keeps us a little flatter. Wow, it's so hot bugger out here. Wow, it is so darn hot. Whew. And from what I can tell, it looks like the horizon is staying real good. I know initially when I first started, the horizon did drift just a little bit, but it seems to be really stable now with this latest firmware upgrade. So I think they're really at a pretty decent, solid place right now. So now we can see us sitting right up here, real nice in the wind. And it is still pretty windy. Maybe a little bit less than before here on the ground. Don't know what it's like 200 feet in the air, but right here it's pretty decent. But it is really windy. I sure would love to try this in a calm setting. But that being said, it should be able to give us some pretty decent stable footage even with a little breeze because it has the wind resistance of a level 8. So not only should it just fly, but it should be able to control pretty decent. I do realize that's a tough requirement. It's easy to say when you get wind pushing a little thing like this around that it's got to be perfectly stable for every shot, one after another. I get that, especially if it pushes it and it recenters. But hey, that's the market we're in, right? We expect perfection, so we'll see how well it does. So the horizon is staying really nice and stable yet. It's pretty square. I can see it across the top of the screen. Oh, really cool. We're getting a boat that just went under the bridge, so that should look cool in our footage. Nice. That was the key, getting that radius a little larger and having that little flip-up window. Maybe it's obvious to everybody else, but it's a good tip to remember if you guys are working on it, that little menu flips off the screen. So once the hyperlapse is done with all the pics, it will automatically turn it into a time lapse, which is a TL.mp4. So it'll turn it into a time lapse, but it will be a video. Now, why that's important is because not only does it simply stitch them together, but you rely on the software to stabilize these pictures and line them all up from frame to frame so that you don't get this wobble. So when you see some wobble or some jitter, when you see time lapses being played back, a lot of that isn't necessarily due to instability in the camera or the drone that you're taking. Although, of course, if it were perfectly stable, it wouldn't have to stabilize them. However, if you see a really good time lapse, a lot of times it just means that the software is really good at stabilizing the footage and lining up each one of those pics so that it looks stable when you play it back as a continuous video. So right out of the app, we can go ahead and push play. We find the file and we push play, and this is what it looks like. You can see that it is a little bit kind of jiggly, a little jumpy here and there, a little wavy. That doesn't surprise me a lot because it was really windy, so I would say that the drone was getting pushed around by the wind quite a bit. But of course, the software should have been able to take out those kind of moves and jumps and bumps as part of the stabilizing software that's in the app. So that tells me that the stabilizing algorithm that they're using for their app maybe needs a little bit of work yet. So honestly, I'm not exactly sure if when you do a hyperlapse, if 100% of the stabilization comes simply from the drone being that stable in the sky, and when you stitch them together, it's very smooth when you play them back, or if most of the stability or some of the stability even comes from post-stabilization software that's running in the firmware of the app, things like that. So maybe you guys can let me know in the comments if you know for sure where the actual stabilization comes from, and maybe it's a combination of the two. So regardless, the footage that we're playing back here, this time lapse, of course, is not acceptable. Nobody wants to see this footage like this. So we're going to go ahead and try a little post-stabilization on this, but we shouldn't have to. But we'll try it and just see if it works out at all. And I'm going to put this in DaVinci Resolve. Now that's what I use to do my post-processing. And I'm going to go ahead and play that same footage back now. Just run through the stabilizer one time. So here's that footage. Okay, now that looks a lot better to me. That even looks pretty impressive, actually. So again, that kind of proves that if you have better stabilization software, that they can solve that. So that's a good thing. Let me go ahead and play those back to back again. So you let me know in the comments, what do you think about the one-touch stabilization that it did in DaVinci Resolve? Does it look pretty decent? Okay, so let's go ahead and do the same hyperlapse using the EXO Mini Pro. We're going to run it up the same way. We're going to put it in the same place just so we can get a kind of a reference footage. Now, it's the same software, it's the same exact app that's being used for the Blackhawk 2 Pro or the EXO Mini. It's the Blackhawk app. So with the same app, it's going to be the same software. So the stabilization, I'm assuming, is going to be very similar. I'm going to use the same settings. I'm going to try to do the same type of radius and the seconds and things like that, just so I can get a good match. As this is going here and I'm watching it, I can feel the wind. I can see the drone, even though I'm 400 feet out, I can see it wiggling up and down. I can see it on my screen getting pushed around when I'd see a gust. So it'll be interesting to see how much worse this footage is. Now, I completely expect that this footage coming out of the camera from this time lapse is going to be worse because the drone is going to get pushed around more because it's half the weight of the Blackhawk 2 Pro. All right, so that is the time lapse. It's all done here. It is already converted. It said it was done with the file. So let's go ahead and just play that back straight out of the app with the stock stabilization and see what it looks like. Okay, now I have to admit, from my eyes, That was jumping around more than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Let's run it through the one-touch resolve stabilization and see what it looks like. Now to me, that looks a lot better. Of course, you guys let me know what you think. So I'm going to go ahead and run this side by side just so you can see what those look like. So now let's put the footage head to head from the Blackhawk 2 Pro to the EXO Mini Pro and see what that looks like. So in summary, did the time lapse coming out of the Blackhawk 2, both the Pro and the EXO Mini Pro, actually work? Well, it actually did take the video, it did take the time lapse, and it did stitch them together. So that part did work. Functionally, the app worked. It didn't lock up or do anything like that. However, the results simply aren't acceptable the way they are. They're not really usable unless you apply some post stabilization to it. But of course, you shouldn't have to do that. Now, it's not going to be a total loss if you do. If you really need this to work, you can make it work, but again, you shouldn't have to go through those extra steps. So that's all I have on the hyperlapse for the Blackhawk 2 series, both the Blackhawk 2 Pro and the EXO Mini Pro. And of course, I do have additional videos going through a lot of the features, functions, operation, things like that. So I will put those links up here and I will put those in the description so that you can see those. And of course, don't forget, I am going to be doing a couple more videos yet going into some of the creative modes, for instance. And those are pretty cool. I shot some of that footage today. There's some pretty cinematic moves that can be had straight out of these drones as well. And of course, if you've learned anything new that you didn't know before or just found something interesting, I would appreciate it if you click that like button. It is free, I promise. So thanks again for stopping by. I do appreciate it. And until next time and next video, good flying.